He was the only man in the company who looked more like a repairman than a soldier. While others cleaned rifles and checked grenades, he sat vocope, hunched over a massive chipped flashlight the size of a small artillery shell, polishing lenses and tinkering with wires as if this piece of junk would win the war. They laughed at him in the daylight, but that night, when the sky exploded with enemy flares and German searchlights turned the battlefield into a shooting gallery, his stupid flashlight became the only weapon that could blind a machine gun and change the course of the attack. The first time the platoon saw his flashlight, they thought it was a joke. In a trench full of mud, steel, and fatigue, he dragged along an old, oversized metal tube, dented and scratched, with a handle wrapped in fabric and a lens that had clearly seen another decade, maybe another war. He placed it on an ammo crate as carefully as others laid down their rifles, unscrewed the back cap, and started checking wires and batteries with the stubborn focus of a man who refused to admit the thing should have died years ago. "Why are you hauling that coffin around, mechanic?" someone scoffed from the firing step. "Going to signal the moon or just blind the cooks in the field kitchen?" He answered the same way every time, with a short, tired grin and a shrug that said, "You don't need to understand." By day, he was just another infantryman. Dirty boots, worn greatcoat, a helmet with a faded mark on the side, and a face cut by sleepless nights that no one benivspomnil na mirny ulica. By night, he turned into a stubborn tinkerer, a one-man workshop in the dugout corner, soldering the reflector, changing the inner lining, polishing glass with the edge of his sleeve. He traded cigarettes for pieces of glass, scrounged broken signal lamps, stripped screws and mirrors from wrecked vehicles, and hid everything in a small box next to his bunk like contraband. His comrades gave the flashlight nicknames: the lighthouse, the museum exhibit, the stupid lamp. Once, a young recruit picked it up with both hands, weighed it, and coughed. "Comrade, this thing's heavier than my rifle. Why don't you just throw it away?" The soldier took the flashlight back without anger, only with a quiet, stubborn calm. "Because it still works," he said, "and anything that still works can be useful. You just need to know when." He never argued with anyone, never tried to convince. When they rolled their eyes as he checked batteries again, he only tightened the casing and flicked the switch, watching the pale beam hit the dugout wall. Inside the beam there were tiny dust particles, drifting slowly like snow. He stared at them not as a dreamer, but as someone measuring, calculating, imagining how this light would cut through smoke, fog, flare glare, and panic. What no one noticed at first was how he positioned himself during night drills and stand-to. While others simply crouched in line, he kept glancing at the enemy side, counting seconds between German flares, marking in his mind where shadows fell when the sky suddenly turned white. He watched how the light from enemy rockets burned the eye, how long it took before dark shapes became visible again, how the pupils struggled to adjust. He paid attention to where searchlights swept, how long they stayed in one sector, how machine gun bursts followed the path of that cold mechanical glare. In the quiet between shellings, while some smoked and others dozed on their packs, he experimented. He slipped colored glass over the lens, thin pieces scavenged from broken signal lamps, red, green, pale blue. He flicked short bursts of light across the inner wall of the trench or the ceiling of the dugout, counting in his head. 1, 2, short, 1, 2, 3, long. He tried different angles, tilting the reflector to scatter the beam or narrow it to a sharp-cutting, concentrated ray. "Are you rehearsing a circus act?" the squad leader once asked, stepping into the dugout and catching him sending silent flashes against the sandbags. The soldier clicked off the light and hid the colored lenses in his pocket. "Just checking how far it will reach," he replied. "You're stupid," the squad leader said, but his voice held more fatigue than malice. "At night, only idiots light themselves up. The Germans love idiots." "That's the point," the flashlight man answered calmly. "I don't plan to light myself up." He had a notebook, but not like the artillery sergeant with neat columns and numbers. His was small, beaten, damp at the edges, with pages rippled from trench humidity. Inside were short marks, distances, angles, approximate timings of flare bursts, notes on how long the eye stayed blind after a direct flash, rough sketches of hills and tree lines. Only two things were always circled and underlined: darkness and afterglow. The company assumed he had just found a way to stay sane. Everyone on the line had their own superstition, their own little madness. Someone carried a piece of shrapnel as a talisman, someone never removed a certain scarf, someone always stepped over the same plank with the same foot first. His madness was that flashlight. As long as he was allowed to twist it in his hands, disassemble and reassemble it, life still had a strange, narrow logic. Then came the order that changed the meaning of his obsession. It arrived in the evening, with the cold that crawled under collars and sat between shoulder blades. The platoon gathered around the officer, faces half lit by a low lantern, half lost in shadow. The map on the crate looked like a blurred stain of lines, woods, and heights. The officer's finger traced a narrow, broken arrow across unfamiliar contours. "Night assault," he said quietly. "We move under enemy flares. They've set up machine guns here, here, and here. We have to cross this open strip and hit them before they fully wake up." Someone swore under their breath. The open strip was exactly the kind of place where flares and searchlights turned men into silhouettes on a firing range. "The Germans have been practicing all week," the officer continued. "They fire flares in a pattern, sweep searchlights across no man's land, and cut everything that moves." He tapped the map again. "We don't get artillery support. Surprise is all we have. And speed." The men muttered, traded glances, pulled at their gear with heavier hands than usual. In a corner, the flashlight man stood silent, eyes fixed not on the map, but on the invisible line between darkness and light. He already knew how long German flares burned. He already knew how searchlights moved, and how the scalp prickled when a white cone of light passed inches above a helmet. Later, when everyone went to check weapons and tighten straps, he sat alone with his flashlight one more time. He opened the casing, checked each wire, each contact, each battery as if it were a trigger. He swapped the reflector for the one he had carefully polished. He slid 2 small pieces of colored glass into a narrow groove he had carved himself. Now he could change the nature of the light with a twist of his wrist, a wide, blinding beam, a focused knife, a short, sharp pulse of colored signal. He wasn't planning to light the ground in front of him. He was planning to light the enemy. Outside, the sky was already dark, but it was the kind of frontline darkness that never truly belonged to night. Somewhere artillery flickered on the horizon, painting the clouds in dirty orange. Somewhere else, a German flare clawed its way upward and exploded into a hard, cold flower of white fire. The squad assembled at the trench lip, each man a bundle of nerves, cloth, metal, and breath steaming in the icy air. They checked each other's straps, patted grenades, adjusted helmets. No one joked now. The laughter about the stupid flashlight had dried up with the last rays of daylight. He slipped the heavy lamp under his arm, close to his body, as carefully as a sniper cradles a rifle. His fingers found the switch, the filter, the improvised lever that would narrow the beam. He knew exactly how it would feel when his thumb pressed down in the middle of the white hell they were walking into. The officer raised his hand. "On my signal. Under their flare, before their machine guns finish waking up." The men nodded, each swallowing his own fear. Above the dead land between trenches, a new German flare shot up, hissing, climbing, drawing a perfect arc. For a moment, it was just a small star against the void. Then it burst into brutal daylight, turning mud into bone-colored paste and men into black cutout shapes. The officer's hand dropped. They went over the top. And somewhere in that blinding, merciless light, among cursing, crunching boots and the first rattling bursts of machine gun fire, one man with a stupid flashlight advanced not just with a rifle, but with a plan. To turn the enemy's own light against them, to punch a sudden hole of darkness into their vision, and to speak to his own, in the chaos, through short, razor-sharp words of light. The first meters felt almost unreal, like running inside someone else's nightmare. Their boots slammed into frozen clods of earth, lungs burned, and the entire world shrank to a narrow tunnel of blinding white above and black mud below. The German flare hung in the sky like a merciless second sun, flattening every shadow, erasing every hiding place, and painting each man into a perfect, sharp target. The first machine gun opened up with a flat metallic roar. The line of tracer fire sliced the air, low and fast, like a horizontal storm of red wasps. Someone to his left cried out and folded without a word, swallowed by the mud before the scream even finished forming. The man with the flashlight did not look. He had long ago learned that looking cost time and time cost blood. He kept his head low, helmet tilted forward, eyes squinting against the savage glare. He knew this light. He had studied it from the trench, counting seconds, memorizing how long it took for German gunners to adjust once a flare burst. Now, in the middle of that wide-open killing ground, those numbers were no longer theory. They were the thin, invisible armor between him and the machine guns. Another flare shot up from the enemy side, rising behind the first one that was already dying into a pale ghost of itself. They overlapped, bathing the field in a surreal, layered brightness, erasing the last hints of natural night. The Germans were not just shooting, they were sculpting the battlefield with light, carving out lanes where nothing living should cross. He dropped behind a shallow dip in the ground, more instinct than plan, his body slamming into the mud. Bullets ripped the air above, snapping and hissing, chewing the top edge of the small rise like an invisible saw. His rifle lay under him, but his hand went to the other weapon first, the cold, heavy cylinder pressed against his ribs, the flashlight. His fingers found the improvised switch, the ridge he had filed with a knife so he could feel it even with numb gloves. He waited. Not for courage. Fear had already moved in and settled behind his ribs. But for timing. Timing was the only thing that still obeyed him on this field. He counted in his head, lips barely moving in the mud. 1, 2, 3, 4. The first flare began to dim, sliding from savage white to a dirty gray that stretched shadows again, but only for a heartbeat. 5, 6. The second flare hit its peak, flooding the world in fresh, vicious light. That was his window. He pushed himself up just enough to see over the lip of earth, squinting into the furnace of the enemy line. The machine gun nest was there, exactly where he knew it had to be. A squat, dark shape behind a broken rise, muzzle flashes flickering in a narrow arc. The German gunners were silhouettes, half-crouched, eyes locked on the glowing field, pupils shrunk to pinholes by their own flares. He ripped the flashlight free. For a split second, his mind threw one last objection at him. This is stupid. You're about to point light at men who already control the light. Then another, colder part of him answered, No, I'm about to change the light they think they control. He thumbed the main switch and twisted the improvised focusing ring in one motion. The flashlight roared to life, not with a weak yellow household beam, but with a narrow, concentrated spear of white, sharpened by his polished reflector and forced through the clean glass. He had spent weeks turning this relic into a weapon. Now it fired. He did not aim at the ground. He aimed straight at the machine gun position. The beam slashed across the night and punched directly into the gunners' faces, cutting through the flare glare like a second, more vicious sun pointed from the wrong direction. For eyes already drowning in brightness, that sudden focused blast was like having a camera flash go off a hand's breadth from the pupil. The reaction was instant and ugly. The machine gun stuttered, then fell silent for a heartbeat as the gunner flinched, head jerking away, hands slipping off the grips. One of the silhouettes threw an arm over his eyes, twisting his body away from the beam. Their world, perfectly calibrated to their own flares and searchlights, suddenly had a brutal alien light source crashing straight into it from below. He moved the beam in a tight, jerky arc, deliberately sweeping it across the nest, from gunner to assistant, from firing slit to the dark mouth of the emplacement. He was not trying to see them better. He was trying to hurt their vision, to carve burning afterimages into their retinas, to turn them blind in the one direction that mattered. Forward. For a second or two, nothing else existed. Not the cries, not the tracers, not the cold. There was only the savage white cone of light and the dark flinching shapes inside it. Then he shifted his thumb, and the beam snapped into something else. The colored glass slid into place with a small mechanical click, almost lost in the roar of battle. The pure white spear of light fractured, first into a harsh, bloody red, then, after a short, deliberate pause, into a cold, sharp green. Short, long. He had practiced this sequence for weeks on the dugout wall. Now he threw it into the open air, onto the low clouds of smoke and dust that hung over no man's land. To the Germans, it was just another insane flicker in the chaos. To his own, it was a word. The men from his platoon, the ones who had watched him play with colors in the trench and cursed him for it, saw the signal flashing through the white hell. Red, green. They knew what it meant. The left machine gun is blinded. Move. Somewhere off to his right, dark shapes surged. Using the thin strip of confusion his light had bought, they lunged forward, not blindly now, but with a narrow purpose. Reach the blinded nest before the gunners could tear the world back into focus. The Germans tried. The machine gun barked again, but the burst went wild, stitching the air too high, sawtoothing a line into the black beyond the advancing men. The gunner shot at ghosts his eyes still thought were standing where they had been seconds ago. His brain was chasing after the afterimages burned by that vicious white beam. A grenade sailed through the air, a small, simple curve against the white. For a moment it looked almost peaceful. Then it disappeared into the dark mouth of the nest. The explosion was low, muffled, heavy. The machine gun coughed once more, like a dying animal trying to finish its growl, and then fell silent. Mud and splinters blew outward. Dark shapes tumbled. The left side of the German fire line cracked. He did not wait to admire it. He dropped back behind the rise as bullets from somewhere else ripped the ground where his head had just been. Another flare screamed up into the sky, desperate, late, trying to rebuild the collapsing wall of light. His heart hammered so hard it felt like it might punch through the webbing on his chest. His hands shook, not from the cold, but from the knowledge that the trick had worked, and that now they would try to kill the man who had pulled it. He forced his breathing down, pressed himself into the mud, and let his eyes adjust again. Through the ringing in his ears and the stutter of distant guns, he heard something new. The officer's voice, closer than before, raw but controlled. Who fired that light? Who gave that signal? No one answered. No one had time. Because the Germans were adapting. The next flare did not go up alone. 3 shot up in a staggered fan, from left, center, and right, clawing at different pieces of the sky. The light thickened, layered, shadows shifted in strange, overlapping patterns. Searchlights from the rear swung forward, their beams cutting across the flares like enormous white scythes. They had felt the gap. They were sealing it. He understood with a cold clarity that somehow floated above fear. One trick was never enough. You blindsided them once. Now they would hunt the source. He slid the flashlight back against his chest and crawled sideways, not forward, not backward, but on a shallow diagonal that would pull him away from the place where his last beam had come from. He knew their gunners would be angry, half-blind, and guessing. Angry, half-blind men with machine guns shot where they remembered the pain had started. The next burst confirmed it. A long, furious stream of bullets chewed into the ground where he had been seconds earlier, spitting mud into the air in explosive clumps. He felt some of it smack into his side, heavy and cold, like fists made of dirt. But the line was different now. On the left, where his signal had cut the first hole, his comrades were already using the silence of the shattered nest like a bridge. They pushed up, firing short, controlled bursts, dropping into shell holes, dragging wounded with brutal efficiency. Shouts rose, some German, some their own, tangled into one harsh, broken chorus. He risked another look over a broken stump, lifting the flashlight just high enough to see. The enemy line was no longer a smooth, steady wall of fire. It was jagged, uneven, one side flaring bright, another side flickering, then going dark as more shots and grenades found their marks. The flares still burned, the searchlights still raked the strip, but there were gaps now, uneven places where the light showed not discipline, but panic. He exhaled slowly, tasting iron and dirt. The flashlight felt heavier in his grip, not just as metal, but as something else now, a device that had stepped over the line from obsession to instrument. He had hurt their eyes once. He had talked to his own in a language of color and timing. The battlefield had answered, and the night, which had begun as the enemy's ally, was starting, slowly, painfully, to turn neutral. There would be no miracle. Men would still fall. Guns would still jam. Orders would still be misheard and repeated through gritted teeth. But in this screaming, blinding chaos, one stubborn infantryman had found a way to bend the very thing the enemy trusted most, their light. He ducked back down, wiped mud from the lens with his sleeve in one swift practiced motion, and checked the battery by feel. Still good, still alive. He wasn't done yet. Because further ahead, past the first broken nest in the torn earth, lay the main machine gun position, the one anchored to the searchlights, the one that was still cutting wide, clean lanes through the dark. That was where his stupid flashlight really needed to shine. By the time he reached the shallow craters before the main position, the battlefield had turned into a broken necklace of light and darkness. Flares still burned overhead, but now they revealed not a solid German line, only shattered pieces. Dead nests, burning crates, men crawling and shouting over each other. The main machine gun still held. It sat higher, dug into a low rise and shielded by sandbags, with a searchlight just behind it, washing the ground in a cold, surgical beam. Every time someone tried to break toward it, the gun stitched the earth flat and the light pinned them in place like insects. He slid into a shell hole with two other survivors, both breathing hard, faces streaked with mud and soot. One of them spat blood and nodded toward the rise. "That's the one," he rasped. "As long as it's there, we stay here." The flashlight man glanced over the edge. The gun crew worked like a machine. Feed, fire, correct, fire again. Behind them, the searchlight operator followed their tracers, sweeping the beam with cruel precision. "You see that?" he said quietly. "They're looking at their own light, not the dark." He knew he would not get a second-long window like with the first nest. The trick was known now. They would expect something strange. So he did the most dangerous thing he could do. He stood up where no one sane would. He climbed out of the crater and half ran, half stumbled toward a broken stump that lay closer to the rise. Bullets snapped around him, one punching through the wood as he dropped behind it, breath tearing at his chest. The stump was nothing, a bad joke of cover, but it gave him one thing he needed: angle. From here, he could see the searchlight face on. The beam washed over the field, brilliant and arrogant, reaching for targets. He waited, letting it pass, feeling it brush his helmet, then his shoulder, moving on. When it started to swing back, searching for him, he moved first. He popped up, just a silhouette in the chaos, and fired the flashlight straight into the heart of the searchlight. For an instant, it looked ridiculous, a tiny, improvised beam challenging a full military lamp. Then, the physics took over. The flashlight's focused white spear hit the searchlight's glass and exploded inside the optics, scattering glare back into the operator's face. The man behind it jerked away with a shout, hands flying off the handles. The great white beam wobbled, then veered upward, slicing the sky instead of the ground. In that same heartbeat, the machine gun crew lost their perfect picture. Their world, which a second ago had been clean, lit targets, dark background, turned into a violent blur of motion, afterimages, and raw, searing pain in their eyes. He switched colors without thinking. White, red, green, rapid, hard, aimed not just at the nest, but high enough for his own to see. To the Germans, it was nonsense, a random flicker. To his side, it was the last phrase of the code. Now, all in. From multiple shell holes and torn ditches, his comrades surged at once. No more waiting for orders shouted over gunfire. The light itself had spoken. Some fired on the move, some just ran, heads down, teeth locked, trusting that this was the only chance they would get. The main gun tried to answer. A frantic burst ripped past him, too low, then too high, stitching ragged lines into the air as half-blind gunners chased ghosts. One crewman turned, trying to find the source of that stabbing beam in his face, and in that turn, he exposed his side. A burst from their own side hit him and threw him back over the sandbags. A grenade landed on the parapet, rolled almost lazily, and dropped into the nest. The explosion tore the machine gun out of its own light. The searchlight died a second later, either hit by shrapnel or abandoned by the operator who dove for cover too late. The great white cone flickered, shuddered, and went out, leaving a sudden dizzying darkness where moments ago everything had been overexposed and merciless. For a few seconds, nobody moved. After so much blinding brightness, the natural night felt unreal, thick, almost soft. Only the smaller, distant flashes, single shots, dying flares, pulsed on the horizon. He sank to his knees, the flashlight hanging from his hand by its fabric-wrapped grip. The casing was warm, almost hot. The battery was nearly dead. In the beam's last moments, it had given everything it had. Footsteps squelched closer. Someone grabbed his shoulder, shook him, then realized he was still breathing. "That was you," a hoarse voice said. "Again, with this stupid thing." The soldier looked at the flashlight and let out a short, tired laugh. "It's not stupid," he answered quietly. "It just needed the right night." By dawn, when the smoke thinned and the officers walked the captured line, the rumors had already spread. Some said it was a secret device, others whispered about a new kind of signal lamp. The truth was simpler. One stubborn infantryman who refused to throw away something that still worked, and who spent his nights thinking about how light hurts the eye. Later, when he sat back in a new trench, someone from another unit pointed at the battered lamp lying beside him. "What's that?" the stranger asked. "Trophy?" He shook his head. "No," he said. "Just an old flashlight." He picked it up, thumbed the dead switch out of habit, and looked at the cracked lens. The war would move on with bigger guns and louder stories, but somewhere, on a cold, open strip of ground, there would always be a place where, for a few minutes, a stupid flashlight had been as dangerous as any weapon. And the men who ran under those flares that night would remember not just the darkness and the fear, but the sudden blinding beam that turned the enemy's light against them and told them, without a word, "Go."